Welcome to MGMT 19128 Strategy and Change. This is week 2 lecture, and in this lecture we talk about business and the revenue models. So the learning objectives include appreciate how organizations utilize business models to make strategic decisions, understand how revenue models work. Through examples, realize different types and contexts of business model, which is in section 2.3. So the business model, as it's discussed in this textbook, is broken into 3 parts, which are covered in figures 2.1, 2.2, and 2.3, and we'll have a look at them very shortly. But what is business model? Business model is a clear picture of what the organization is or isn't. It identifies who will buy its products or services and why. It also is a vehicle to deliver the purpose or the mission of the organization. We'll talk about mission, vision statements in detail in chapter 3. The revenue model focuses on activities, what the business does to conserve resources, manages resources efficiently, and prioritize those resources that create and build value for the customers. Note that the business model and the revenue model complement each other. So the first part of the business model, this is the value proposition bit, but we also have the operating model and revenue model we'll cover in the next couple of slides. But the first bit is the value proposition model. This basically answers the question of what the business is in, the organization is in terms of what we provide, what is the product or services that we are providing, and for whom are we providing, who's our target customer. But more importantly, why will these customers buy our product and services? So that's the value proposition. And that is the key thing in this business model. So when we develop a business model, first thing we need to think about is what product and services are we going to sell, provide, for whom, and why would they buy our product or services, which is the value proposition. That's the first thing we need to cover in a business model. When it comes to the operating model, we are talking about the activities and delivery of the products and services. So as you can see, this product, customer, and the compelling logic or reason to buy is actually the first part of the business model we just covered. And this is the big picture. So the little picture is what activities we need to perform. What is the delivery system that we must have in order to sell our products and services or offer our products or services to the customers. But one thing we should keep in mind, and I have emphasized that in week 1 lecture, is that strategy is not a static thing. It needs to be changed constantly. An organization must be on their toes to understand that the environment changes constantly, and therefore strategy must change constantly as well. So not only should we think about what the customer values today, but we also must think about what the customer will value tomorrow. And that is the future picture. What is the idea for the future? And we must prepare our organization so that we can change our organization accordingly in order to satisfy our customers in the future. And that's very, very key. So if you think about Apple, one of my favorite examples, they not only think about what's happening today, what the customer's needs are that they're satisfying today, but they're thinking about the future as well, what the customer will want in the future, and they're working towards that. So that's the future picture. So that's the operating model. Lastly, we have the revenue model. This is basically talking about the first bit of the business model we just covered, the value proposition model. We have the target market, value proposition, route to market, customer and relationships and product loyalty. The second one was the operating model, which is about the key resources that we have, the activities and the delivery system that we must have, and the partnerships that we must have with our suppliers, for example, or raw material suppliers, or the retail shops that we sell through. And the last bit is the revenue model. So this is the revenue model. What is our revenue stream? How are we going to make money in our organization, for our organization? And what are the costs that we must keep into account so that we make enough profit? And this is important, as I think most of you know that revenue minus cost is actually profit. Better to illustrate the revenue model through an example. So this is an example of business model where, first of all, these are all internet-based these are actually radios. So this Pandora is an internet-based radio system, and then we have the over-the-air radio broadcaster, which is not internet-based. So the first thing we look at is the customer value proposition. And if you see that Pandora, for example, provides a free of charge internet radio service, which is allowed on PC, tablet, computer, and smartphone users. They also have algorithms that help generate playlists based on users' predicted music preference. They offer programming which is interrupted by brief and occasional ad, but this ad is eliminated when Pandora One, for the Pandora One subscribers. Now that's the customer value proposition. Why would customer use their service? Because of these reasons. So that's the value proposition. This part, profit formula, is the revenue model. So how do Pandora generate revenue? Well, it's quite obvious from the customer value proposition that they generate revenue by selling ads. So display, audio, video ads that are targeted to different audiences and sold to local and national buyers. And for Pandora One, the ones which do not see ads, subscription revenue. So customers who subscribe to Pandora One, they provide the subscription revenue. So in other words, Pandora One, in this case Pandora, generates money through two sources. One is the ad, the other one is subscription. What about the cost structure? Well, they have fixed costs, which is associated with developing the software or computer. They also have variable costs and fixed costs from operating the data centers, marketing, royalty, and support activities. And the profit margin, therefore, depends on how much ad they can sell, how much subscription revenue they can generate, but also depends on how they manage their cost structure, the fixed cost, the variable cost, and so forth. So this is a good example of a business model that not only talks about revenue model, but also talks about the value proposition model. The other two examples are the same. Now they're in the same industry, radio industry in this case, but they have different business models, which is perfectly fine. Each company can have different models. Also remember that the business model will differ from industry to industry. So that's something to keep in mind. The textbook covers quite a number of business models for different companies, and they're in quite detail, so you can actually read some of the examples. They are not all products. Some of them are services. You have London Zoo, for example, is a non-profit organization. Manchester United, which is a soccer or football team. So they talk about the way these organizations or companies utilize business model to make money for the company and ultimately for the shareholders. The last thing we're going to talk about is something called strategic evaluation and choice. So when we decide on a strategy, or when we are comparing several strategies and we have to decide on what strategy to go with for the organization, we have to think about two logics, the strategic logic and the financial logic. And the idea is very simple. The strategic logic is about the value proposition. So linked to the business model, impact on current strategy, we want to enhance the value for the customers. In other words, do we satisfy the customer need? The other one, financial logic, is about money. By getting into this, by accepting this particular strategy, will we make money or not? Will we make revenue? Which will ultimately have an impact on the shareholder value. So let's take a look at this diagram in a little bit more detail. So if we look at the first option, if the financial logic is poor, meaning that we are not going to make money from this particular strategy, and the strategic logic is also weak, which means that we do not satisfy the customer needs by accepting this particular strategy, then that's not a good strategy. And the idea is that that's an option that the organization must avoid, because it doesn't satisfy the customer, it also doesn't make money for the organization. If we look at this particular quadrant, this is where the strategic logic is very, very strong, but the financial logic is weak, meaning we do satisfy the customer need, however, we do not make enough money from this particular strategy. So there is a downside risk. And that means that this particular strategy, if the company does go with this strategy, will need subsidization. because it doesn't generate enough money on its own. Therefore, it will have to get some money to sustain this particular strategy. The other one is this one, downside risk. So this is where the financial logic is very strong. We make money out of this particular strategy. However, the strategic logic is quite poor or weak, meaning that we do not satisfy customer needs. And this means that we do not satisfy customer needs, but we make enough money. However, because we do not satisfy customer need, we do not have the strategic logic, this will mean in the long run, we will not achieve our strategic aim. So this is a strategy which will lead to distraction and loss of focus. And we should try to avoid it if possible. The best strategy that choice we can go for is this quadrant, the priority choice as they call it. And I think that's quite obvious by now. The strategic logic is very strong. The financial logic is very strong. So we make money out of this particular strategy, and we also satisfy customer needs from this particular strategy. So this is a strategy that we should undertake. So when you're comparing 1 or 2, 3 or 4 strategy options, you have to basically filter them through, and this could be considered as a filter. And the filter is basically, does it have a strong strategic logic? Does it have a strong financial logic? If your answer to a particular strategy that you're considering is yes, in both the cases, yes, that particular strategy you're considering has strong strategic logic, but also has strong financial logic, then that's a strategy you should go for. And this concept will probably become quite useful when you do your assessment number 2, where you have to come up with a strategic plan for the organization. Concept check questions, the answers are generally in the textbook, in the chapter especially. So you can try them. You can write the answers on the forums and see how the other students respond. That's pretty much up to you. All right, thank you very much. That's the end of week 2 presentation.